The Astronomy Program Alternative Universe Explanation. Okay, so I've been working on an AU called the Astronomy Program, and I wanted to actually sit down and explain what this AU is, where an idea came from, and what I currently have planned for it. But before I get into the actual story, I want to make something clear. This alternative universe is still a work in progress. There are a lot of things I'm still developing, including parts of the story, character details, relationships, and especially character designs. So if you see a design or an idea now and then see something completely different later, that's probably because I'm still figuring things out. I don't want to rush the use just so I can say everything is finished. I want to actually take my time with it and figure out what works. So what I'm showing right now is basically the AU while it's still being built, where the inspiration came from. Before I explain the actual premise, I also want to talk about where the motivation for this AU came from. A huge part of my motivation and inspiration for creating the astronomy program came from the Sun and Moon show. I've been really inspired by the characters, their stories, the different relationships between them, and especially the idea that Sun and Moon were originally connected as one being. And I want to make it clear that I'm not claiming that shared origin concept as something I invented, because it's already part of the original Sun and Moon lore. Instead, I took that idea and started thinking, what would happen if I explored a concept like that in a completely different dimension with completely different versions of the characters? That's basically where the astronomy program started. It's inspired by the Sun and Moon show, but I'm building my own story around it. So, what is the astronomy program? The basic premise is that we follow Nova and Skye, who are main characters of this AU. They're my versions of Sun and Moon for this universe, but I don't want them to just feel like Sun and Moon with different names. They're their own characters. They have their own personalities, their own relationships, their own problems, and their own story. And there are certain things about them that the audience isn't supposed to understand immediately. That's actually a pretty important part of how I want the AU to work. I don't want to introduce Nova and Skye and immediately explain every single thing about them. Some things are supposed to be discovered naturally through the story, their everyday lives. At the beginning of the story, Nova and Skye work at an after school astronomy program. The program is for kids roughly between the ages of 3 and 13 and is funded through the school that they work at. Their job is basically to look after the kids after school while also teaching them about astronomy and space. Skye mainly works with the younger kids while Nova works with the more older kids. And honestly, this is where I want the beginning of this AU to spend most of its time. I don't want the first episode to immediately become some massive lore explanation. I want to show that their everyday lives actually, like, you get to see them working, you get to see how they interact with kids, you get to see how they interact with each other, and you get to see smaller problems that come from running an after school program. Skye is a character I don't want to explain too much about right away. At first, one of the most obvious things about them is that they're really good with the kids. They know how to interact with them, keep them entertained, and handle the chaos that comes with working with younger children. They're genuinely good at their job. But there's another side to Skye that isn't immediately obvious. The way they behave around kids isn't necessarily the same way they behave around certain other people. you know, everybody's like that. But there's specific people in the story who bring out a completely different side of them, and that's something I can't really explain quite yet. But because those characters and situations are things I want to reveal later. So for now, all I'm really going to say is Skye is not straightforward as they appear. You might think you understand their personality when you first meet them, and then later you might start realizing, oh, there's more going on with them. I want the audience to discover that rather than me just telling them exactly why they act differently. Nova. Nova is more reserved and focused. They tend to get really caught up in whatever they're working on, and they can be pretty quiet when concentrating. They also have a project that they've been working on, and that's basically all I'm going to say about it for now. I don't specifically know everything about what the project is for yet, and I don't want to make up a huge explanation just because I need something to say. So for now, Nova has a project. It's something that they're working on, it's something that matters to them, and eventually we'll know more. But I'm deliberately leaving that open right now because the AU is still being developed. Episode 1. The first episode is currently based around the idea of showing Nova and Skye's normal lives. Perhaps more. The working title is First Day Under the Stars, though that might change. Um, and I really want this episode to focus on the characters themselves. You get to see them working, you get to see them dealing with the kids, you get to see their personalities, you get to see their dynamic, you get to see the everyday problems that come with their job. Basically, I want the audience to become familiar with them because I don't want episode 1 to immediately go, here's the hidden stuff, here's the spoiled, here's exactly what happened, here's every piece of lore you need to know. I think that would make the story less interesting. I want people to meet Nova and Skye first. The mystery. The hidden side of the story is something that I'm going to build toward. The audience isn't supposed to know everything immediately. There are going to be things about Nova and Skye that don't quite make sense. There are going to be questions about who they are, where they came from, and why certain things about them are the way they are. But I'm not going to answer all of those questions immediately. Instead, I want the audience to slowly start putting things together. You might notice something strange, then something else happens later, then something that seemed completely unimportant turns out to matter, and eventually you realize these things were connected. The Soul Split. The first title uh, for this year I had was called The Soul Split, or The Eclipse Soul Split. It obviously comes from the idea of a soul being divided, and this is where the connection to the inspiration come from the Sun and Moon show becomes especially important. But I don't want Nova and Skye to simply be two basic halves of one personality. They're individuals, they have their own experiences, they have their own personalities, they can make their own decisions. And that's something I want to explore through them. If two people have a shared origin, what does that actually mean for their relationship? Does it mean they're always going to understand each other? Does it mean they're supposed to be similar? Or can they become completely different people despite having that connection? And what happens when they eventually start learning more about themselves? Those are the questions I want the story to explore over time. Why the beginning is normal. One of the biggest things I'm trying to do with this AU is make sure that the characters come before the lore. I want people to actually care about Nova and Skye before I start revealing the bigger mysteries surrounding them. So if the first episode feels relatively normal, that's intentional. You're supposed to see them working, you're supposed to see them interacting with kids, you're supposed to see their personalities, you're supposed to get a feel for their relationship. And then eventually, when the story starts changing, the normal parts no, are important because they make strange parts feel more significant. The character designs. And then there's the visual side of the AU. I'm currently working on the character designs. They're definitely not finished. I'm still experimenting with how Nova and Skye should look and what details should be part of their designs and how their appearances should actually communicate who they are. I don't want to just make a sign and immediately say, okay, that's the final design. I want to experiment with them. There might be sketches, there might be different versions, there might be redesigns, there might be details that I really like but eventually decide won't work. And that's completely fine because this AU is still being built. The designs are being developed alongside the story, so if something changes later, that's part of the process. I'm currently working on side characters that are comic relief amongst other things. Here's a character name I'm thinking about: Hee Hee. That stands for Hospital Entertainment and Help. It's a cute little clown. It's a fun little thing I thought about mentioning. So, what really is the astronomy program? Basically, the astronomy program is my own alternative universe exploration of the shared origin between Sun and Moon, inspired heavily by the Sun and Moon show, but placed into a completely different setting with Nova and Skye as the main characters. They work in an after school astronomy program. Skye is really good with the kids, but there's another side to them that comes around certain people, and I can't really talk about it yet. Nova is more reserved and focused, and they're working on a project that we currently don't know the full purpose of. Their everyday lives are relatively normal at first, but underneath that normal life is a much bigger mystery. The audience isn't going to know everything immediately. Some things will be obvious, some things will be subtle, and some things I'm deliberately keeping secret until later, even though they might change. Because I want people to experience the story rather than me just explaining the story beforehand. And that's basically where the astronomy program is right now. It's still being built. I'm still working on the characters. I'm still working on the designs. And I'm still working on certain parts of the story. So this isn't necessarily the final version of everything. It's still the current version, and as I keep developing it, some things are probably going to change. But this is the foundation I'm working from, and I'm really excited to see what the astronomy program eventually becomes. So if you listened so far, I would recommend maybe liking and subscribing if you feel for it, and maybe share with your friends or something. Have a wonderful day, and that is it.
Wait, don't leave just yet. The video is almost over and you can look at the final designs that I've made. Here's the first one. They're just work in progress characters. And here's the so far Nova and Skye. Enjoy and like and subscribe.